this year in 2020, who would be your number one pick in fantasy football this year?
Ooh. All right, I'm going to say Christian McCaffrey for this one. I think the guy is going to be the focal point of his team again. Again, PPR-wise, when you look at McCaffrey, you have to look at most leagues are PPR, whether they're half-point or full-point PPR. And again, he's going to catch the ball out of the backfield a lot. You have a college-style offense now, which, again, Matt Rule is going to bring. And Matt Rule made the best out of his running backs in that one season at Baylor. And Christian McCaffrey, obviously, the kind of player he is, way more skilled than anything that he has ever was coaching there. And you look at the season, he had 107 catches in 2018, 116 catches in 2019, and had 1,000 receiving yards. There are receivers that don't get to 1,000 receiving yards. You have to expect probably a little bit of regression from a 2,000-yard season, but it doesn't mean he can't be the best player again when he's still the focal point of that team. You have a new quarterback in Teddy Bridgewater who's going to take some time to get used to the system. And again, Teddy Bridgewater, being a not very big-arm quarterback, he probably is going to use his running backs a lot more. He did that in Minnesota when he was there, and even though Alvin Kamara was hurt at times last year, when he was playing, he was useful for Teddy Bridgewater with the Saints. So from that judgment, I think you have to have it be Christian McCaffrey from the way he looks at it. There's going to be some touchdown regression. Okay, there's going to be some yards regression, but you have to factor in, too, that, again, PPR leagues are really what's dominating fantasy football right now. And he can run. He was, I think, the fourth leading rusher in the league last year. He can run and he can catch. And that's when you look at everything. And now you have a college coach to go along with that, a modern type offense to go with that. That makes a big difference in terms of his production, even if it drops off a little, not dropping off too much, where he could still be definitely the best player and best value pick at number one.
I'm going to go on the opposite. I'm going to go with a quarterback here. Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson was the best when it came to fantasy, running the ball, throwing the ball last year accurately. He threw over, I think, what was his completion percentage last year? I'm trying to get his completion percentage.
I want to say it was 66.
It's 66.1%. I mean, Lamar Jackson, he can run, he can throw, he's a dual threat. He can do everything on the field that other quarterbacks can't do at a high level. Now, I know everybody's going to say Patrick Mahomes, he can run the ball and throw the ball. He can't run 1,000 yards like Lamar Jackson can. And to me, with a PPR league and the transition of the PPR league and the fantasy league, you have to look at a running quarterback, a guy that can throw completion passes, guy that can throw touchdowns. Last year, I think he had 36 touchdowns to only 6 or 4 interceptions. I mean, Lamar Jackson all around. And really, when we talk about Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson, these guys are dual threats. Even Russell Wilson. These guys can do not one, but 2 or possibly 3 things in fantasy where it's going to gain you 50 to 60 points. And the quarterback position, in my eyes, if you can get a quarterback to give you about 40 to 50 points every single week, you have a chance to win every single week. So it's Lamar Jackson.
Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. Those rushing yards, especially for quarterbacks, will contribute. All right, you guys,
God mute us.
Yeah, I think when you talk about ESPN, Yahoo, NFL.com, all of them are going to say the number one guy you should pick is exactly who Speedy said, Christian McCaffrey. And you know what happens every year to that number one pick that everyone says should be the number one pick? Something bad happens to them. They don't end up as the number one pick. So other than stating the obvious, obviously Christian McCaffrey had a fantastic year, but there's a lot of question marks surrounding Christian McCaffrey. He's got a new coach. He's got a new quarterback. He's going to be in a new system. We don't know how that will translate, not to mention the fact that at the running back position, you have so many guys that are very close at that elite level. You have Saquon Barkley. You have other guys that are, at that elite level. Le'Veon Bell could have a bounce back year. We've seen him dominate fantasy leagues before. So, I could go down the list and continue on. And it was interesting that Errol said Lamar Jackson because you have a guy in Patrick Mahomes that, is also an elite fantasy producer. And while he doesn't have the rushing production, he could have much more passing production. So when you have those guys that their competition is almost as good as them, you want to take someone that's much ahead of their competition. And the only player at a value position like running back, quarterback, receiver that is like that in this year is Michael Thomas. Because when you talk about a PPR league, which Speedy rightfully said is pretty much what everyone's doing nowadays, PPR has a lot of popularity. Michael Thomas just broke the record for the most catches, the most receptions, the most points you can get in your fantasy league for a guy catching the ball. And he looks like he's going to do it again because he excels in slants and in routes and out routes and bubble screens. They find a way to get him the ball in easy ways, and then his yak ability takes care of itself. So I think when you're looking at a guarantee, I don't think there's any bigger guarantee of anyone producing at a high level than Michael Thomas. So I think putting him as your number one pick can lock you in for an elite wide receiver position. Whereas if you take someone else, you could probably get almost equivalent production in the second or third round.
Yeah, I try to really take fantasy with the true GM approach. And when it comes to taking a running back, they're usually underpaid for a reason. And that's because it's more likely for them to get hurt. And Christian McCaffrey is obviously a very boom prospect, but that injury potential really worries me as that being my first pick of the draft. And when I look at Michael Thomas, he's going to get the volume, he's going to get the catches, he's going to get the receptions. And even if his quarterback does get hurt, like Drew Brees did last year, he still led the league in yards and receptions. So if Drew Brees did get hurt again this year, they would still have Taysom Hill, and they would still have Jameis Winston. So, I mean, there's not much of a drop-off. There's not much that you really have to worry about him when it comes to the risk factor. And he's only missed one game in his career. And when you think about the second-best receiver fantasy-wise, I think there's a big gap between that when it opposed to quarterback and running back. So I think Michael Thomas's volume, the quarterback scares on his team, the way his team just feeds him, I think he's my clear number one pick in this draft.
All right, next question for us.
Well, I agree with both of you, and I look at Lamar Jackson just because he's transitioned the game as a running quarterback, and everybody says, well, Russell Wilson and this guy and Deshaun Watson. Go look at what he has done on the field last year in fantasy PPR leagues. He dominated the PPR league. And as long as they protect him, which they will protect him this year, he's going to be able to run against teams again this year. And if he's giving you 40 to 50 points every single week, you're not going to get that much from a wide receiver every single week. Michael Thomas isn't going to give you 40, 50 points every single week. He can give you 20, 25, 30. He's not going to give you 40, 50. That's the thing. When you have a dual threat like Lamar Jackson, I think he could dominate the game in so many different ways. So that's why I argue a quarterback. Even though a lot of people in fantasy do not draft a quarterback in the first round.
There was a lot of good ones, that's why.
Right.
All right, our first dual sport question. The better underdog championship run. The Mavericks when they won their title against the Miami Heat in 2010 or 11, or last season with the Washington Nationals?
Ooh, great question. So who had a better title run, the Mavericks when they upset the Heat or the Nationals? So I know mine off the bat. I think it's the Washington Nationals. I thought it was the best playoff run in baseball history that I've ever seen. I mean, I thought the Mavs run was magical in the fact that they upset the Heat, and I think they swept the Lakers, if I'm not incorrect, who had just won the last two Western Conference championships. And you know, that was a great run, but what the Nationals were able to do in the fact that they were in the wild card game and came from behind to win that, down 2 runs, won that, then go to face the Dodgers, the best record in the National League, down 2-1 in the series, come back, and then in Game 5, down by 2 runs again, and Anthony Rendon and Juan Soto hit iconic back-to-back jacks off Clayton Kershaw, and let it be known that Clayton Kershaw is not a great playoff performer, and then also that they are the best tandem in the middle of the lineup that we've probably ever seen in playoff history. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous what Anthony Rendon was able to do. But as I continue to look back at their run in the NLCS, then they swept the Cardinals. It wasn't even a contest, which, you know, doesn't add to the magicness of the postseason. But then when they're facing the Astros, they take a great 2-0 lead in Houston, by the way, with Juan Soto taking Garrett Cole deep, doing the impossible. They forced Garrett Cole to lose the game. The best pitcher in baseball, probably one of the best half seasons we've seen from a pitcher in a long time. This is Garrett Cole's second half before he had to face the Nationals. And then they come back and they go down 3-2, go back into Houston and win 2 more times at a place where we know now that there's been cheating going on. So they overcame cheating. They overcame comeback after comeback. They overcame the wild card game, and they did it with their heart of the lineup producing at ungodly levels. And I haven't even talked about the biggest hero of them all, Howie Kendrick, who came through with one of the only grand slams in extra innings MLB postseason history, and then did it again with the biggest hit in Nationals franchise history in Game 7 off a low and away curveball. We actually just put it on PSO_sports on Instagram. We just put up the 20 greatest plays of the 2000s, and that was number 8 because of the situation and the difficulty of hitting that pitch. And so their entire run, and to do it off of the pitchers, they did it. Clayton Kershaw, as I mentioned before, Jack Flaherty, you know, Josh Hader, they come back on Garrett Cole, Justin Verlander. They beat the best of the best, and it proved that they were the best and had the best playoff run.
Yeah, I think Rob hit it on the head. I mean, when you come into the series, you got what you guys from the Washington, D.C. area, and nobody in this area truly believed that the Nationals had a chance to win the World Series last year. The way that they came in and beat the Dodgers and they beat the cheating Astros, and just comparing that to the unlikely heroes they have, or not even really unlikely, but the young players such as Soto hitting bombs, Howie Kendrick coming in and making big play after big play. And just comparing that to the series that Dirk had.
And your time is up. You used all the 3 minutes. All right, you want to go first for this for us, or you want to?
You go. You can go first.
All right, so we're going to take the Dallas Mavericks here, and again, both runs were phenomenal, but I also think though too, Dallas again was more dominant in their playoff run. When you look at it, they won in 6 games against the Blazers, which actually was after tied with the Miami Heat for the most games they had to take. They swept the Lakers, like you were saying, which were still a fantastic team at that time. They beat a Thunder team, which had Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. Granted, Westbrook and Harden weren't as good yet, but they were still dominant players. And the Dallas roster, when you look at it, there was a lot of players that were past their prime, and again, you didn't know what they were going to get. Yet you knew Dirk was there, you knew what he was going to get. Tyson Chandler was a great center in the league at that time, but again, a lot of the guys on that roster were past their prime. When you look at Jason Kidd, you look at Sean Marion, Peja Soryakovich was a good three-point shooter. You had Jason Terry past his prime too, another great three-point shooter when you look at all-time threes made. So again, from that standpoint, you have to look at it. And again, what was all the hype? When is LeBron going to win? When is LeBron going to win? So that has to put some pressure on Dallas when you look at it, because again, look at the NBA. Look at what the NBA is branded on. They branded on their stars winning and their stars legacies. And Dallas went in there, nothing to lose, and just dominated them. It's not like they dominated them and it was a close series. It was 4-2, and this was a 3 seed, a Dallas Mavericks 3 seed with a lot of older players. They had a better coach in Rick Carlisle over what Eric Spoelstra was at that time. But again, they had, of that series, when you look at it, Dirk was probably the 3rd or 4th best player overall when you look at LeBron and Wade. And then again, him Bosh are probably about the same at that time. So I think it's Dallas, and it looks like Errol's agreeing.
I'm going to say it's Dallas too, especially, and I know everybody argues what the Nationals did last year, and the Nationals did they had an unbelievable run, especially what they did going through the playoffs. But look at the roster. First of all, they were 57-25 going into the playoffs. They were a 3rd seed, and like Speedy was saying, go look at their team, JJ Barea. JJ Barea was their best player throughout the playoffs. He played the best throughout the playoffs. An old Jason Kidd, who washed up Jason Kidd, who hasn't really won a championship. A guy that went back to Dallas from the Nets to try to win a championship with Rick Carlisle and that team. So you look at all in all, that whole team: Steve Novacek, Dirk Nowitzki, Sasha Voyachek, Peja Stojakovic, Jason Terry. These are all washed up players, old players. They went into Miami, beat Miami, and they beat Miami in 6 games. They didn't even go to a 7-game process, which would a lot of people, when you look at that team and the dominance of that team with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh and LeBron James and all the players that they had. Yes, it was LeBron James' first year on the Miami Heat, but again, what that team did, what the Mavericks did, going through the West was so hard to get through the West, and then go to the East and play the Miami Heat as dominant as they were throughout the regular season, especially in the second half. Miami was the most dominant team in the second half of the season. First half, they were starting to figure things out, and then in the second half, they were completely dominant. So it is the Dallas Mavericks.
They also only held Miami to 100 points once. Every other time, they had less than 100 points.